Hi there. I am Dr. Nathalie Edmond. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and owner of the practice in Ewing, New Jersey called Mindful and Multicultural Counseling. And I thought about last year when I decided to grow my practice, I really wanted to center people of color and people who are used to being oppressed by a system that wasn't built for them. And all the events that have been happening the last couple of months, I'm going to really center racism today and this week around just the way the system of oppression, the system of racism in which this country, the United States, was built upon, how that continues to impact us in so many ways that I think are really rising to the surface. And I think about the way that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting communities of color and why that might be, right? And that's because of the history of racism. I think about the people who continue to be murdered because of biases, because of anti-Blackness culture, and just thinking about their names, right? We have Ahmaud, we have George Floyd, we have Breonna Taylor. The list goes on and on. And I think about this time of protesting, of awakening in this period of isolation. And I think about the many ways in which we can use this as an opportunity for change, as an opportunity to dig deep and really process the confusion, the sadness, the rage. I know for myself, raising biracial children, I am filled with such sadness. The fear is there as well, and the anger is there as well, but I'm most connected to the sadness these days. To see so many people just living their life and yet having the added burden of racism, not because of anything they've done, but because of the color of their skin. And how will we start a revolution to start to change that? And so I was deeply moved by a book written by Ruth King, this queer cis woman of color. And it came out last year, and it's called Mindful of Race, Transforming Racism from the Inside Out. And one of the things I love about her book is that it talks about racism on a different level, that really says that in order for racism to change, we need to own our individual contributions to that system. And while I am not a white person, right, I do my own part in working to try to dismantle the system of white supremacy. And it begins with us learning our history. So I am going to read you the story that Ruth King has in her book. And it's called Untold. Right? And this story is a story that white people might consider reading or adapting for their own children, because I know that I have many white friends who are struggling with how to do their part to become anti-racist. And how do we start to talk to our children, to talk to our friends, to talk to ourselves about how this thing we call racism is so deep in our culture. So I'm going to be releasing a series of videos in the next 2 weeks. Feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Mindful and Multicultural Counseling, so you can get updates. I'll also post the videos on this Facebook page as well, just because this is a passion I have, something that I try to live day in and day out, and some days I do better than other days. So I invite you to take a deep inhale and slowly let it out. And take another deep inhale and slowly let it out. Starting to connect to your feet and just feeling the support of the earth beneath you. Noticing how you may be feeling, what emotions may be arising as you just hear this topic of racism. allowing all of the feelings and sensations to arrive. And I think about when I hear things, how does my body hear it? How does my mind hear it? And how can I be open to whatever may arise? Because the first step in becoming anti-racist is listening. Listening to voices that tend to be invisible. Listening to voices that tend to be denied, denigrated. So I invite you to take a seat or perhaps lie down and allow this story called The Untold by Ruth King. My child, I'd like to tell you from my lips the truth about our racial history, about whiteness, and about being a tribe of the white tribe, being a member of the white tribe. Years ago, our ancestors did a horrific deed against the human race. They owned Black people. They owned them as slaves and treated them with utter disrespect. Beatings, rape, torture, lynching, ongoing terror. We sold their children to the highest bidders and owned them as possessions. And we relied on them to grow our food and take care of our children, your ancestors. Yes, our people did this, white people. Not only did we do this to Blacks, we also did hateful things to people who we felt were substandard, like American Indians, Mexicans, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, and poorer people than we were. It's true that the greatness of this country, to a large extent, is due to the slave labor of Blacks, and we owe them a huge debt. We have, as a white race, disenfranchised them and systematically organized to keep them from participating in and benefiting from the wealthiest country in the world. Our success, however big or small, and the many privileges we enjoy as a family, are rooted in the stained and denied history. Even to this day, our people benefit from the institutional practices that intentionally and systematically oppress Black and other dark bodies. Many poor white people feel that they are better than Black people, even better than the first Black president of the United States. Being ashamed about this is not as helpful as understanding that we have a lot of work to do to begin to respect Blacks and dark lives, to release and share the wealth and privileges we have for all they have given to us as white people. Blacks and other POCs, people of color, are rightfully angry toward us because of the centuries of hatred and disrespect we have shown them. We have continued as a collective to build prisons, to hide and erase them, instead of facing the years of hatred toward them and shame toward ourselves that have resulted in destroyed hearts, minds, and communities. Most important, we have died inside as a result of making hatred normal as a race. We have become numb, dismembered, crude, and unloving toward our own race because we cannot access the depth of love as a collective with such a hatred and stained history of disrespect and hatred toward other humans. What this means to you and me is that we must wake up to this history and own that we walk with great ease in this country on their still sore backs. Backs we whipped into submission. What we witness today in the Black collective expression is a result of generations of Blacks who have witnessed their parents and grandparents killed, lynched, raped by our men, and hated and disrespected by us. They were helpless against it. We made sure of that. You need to understand that while we have our fears, we tend to walk without racial fear. We tend to walk without racial fear, and they don't. This world is not safe for them and other people like them, dark people, and it is because of our history, our whiteness. To this day, we have better schools and access, and we still are the central race in all aspects of respectable society, work, and leadership. Black communities are largely poor, and their schools are disenfranchised because we have kept them at a disadvantage. Many of them are considered criminals, even though they are not doing anything more than we do in our communities. Yet they are imprisoned and used again as slave labor. Many whites want to maintain white supremacy, and there continues to be white nationalist rallies and terror attacks on other races near and far, emboldened by leaders. We have done horrible things as a white race, unspeakable things. Yet we have not spoken or been honest with each other or ourselves as a white race. While you and I may not have done these things personally, this is our history and our inheritance. This is what people of color see when they see white people. Even though that is not all of who any one person is. Our challenge is to do everything humanly possible to recognize and interrupt any act of disrespect and unearned privilege, and to use our voices, our bodies, and our hearts to make this wrong right. We need this in order to be free. This does not mean kissing up to blacks or anyone else, although it may seem that way. Rather, it means a willingness to face into the pain they carry because we've been so cavalier, numb, and blind to the role we have played in the past, and present horrors of their lives. Our job now and for a long time is to own up to it, apologize, and recognize that their expressed pain is not directed to you or me as an individual, but to us as a white race, and as the institutional power that continues to oppress them, often through our ignorance, greed, comfort, righteousness, and indifference. I tell you this because you may well receive much disdain from Black people. When they see you, they are also seeing our unclaimed and terrorizing history. They see you as someone who, like our forefathers, hated them. And they see our ignorance the way we casually delight in a disowned and forgotten history. A history where we consider them as less than human, as possessions, as chattel. The history wasn't that long ago. They are and should be hurt and angry by our utter neglect and generational hatred. There is much to be done. There is no time for guilt and shame or despair. We must forgive ourselves and correct this wrong. We must become advocates for all of humanity, especially Black and dark-skinned bodies. Enough said for now, but we will speak again of this, again and again and again. So that was a story called The Untold by Ruth King. And I share that story because I think no change can truly happen until we understand the history of the United States. I hope that you will continue to join me this week as I deliver other short videos talking about how to use mindfulness and compassion and yogic and meditative practices to start to dismantle racism, to moving away from just saying you're not racist, to actually being an anti-racist. And how do we do that with love and compassion and invite people into a conversation. I so appreciate those of you tuning into this video because I hear a hunger, a curiosity for things to change. And we all can do our part to dismantle brick by brick the system of white supremacy. And many of you may not be familiar with that phrase of white supremacy and what it means as a system, not as an individual group. And those will be one of the many topics we will explore in the next week or two. I have to tell you that I feel so much hope. I was sharing on my private Facebook feed last week that there have been so many shootings, there have been so many murders of Black and dark brown bodies. And to see, scrolling on my Facebook feed late last week, so many of my white friends, so many of them posting about white privilege, right? They could so easily be silent. And I have to tell you as a Black, cis woman of color that silence hurts tremendously. And so to see so many people speaking up in their own ways, that is how change happens. And there are so many ways to be an anti-racist, from marching, to writing, to self-care, to rest, to where we choose to buy things, to where we choose to live, to who we choose to associate with. All of these things are ways that either dismantle white supremacy or continues to support white supremacy. Until we meet again, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you. Take care.